Have you ever noticed how quiet things get when someone finally realizes they can no longer control you? Not the loud kind of silence, but the heavy one, the kind that means something has shifted deep beneath the surface. When a narcissist knows you will never come back, they don't always chase you. Sometimes they do something far more unsettling, something hidden, something psychological, and most people never see it coming. In today's video, we're diving into the subtle behaviors they rarely admit, the emotional reactions they hide behind closed doors, and the uncomfortable truth Carl Jung hinted at about ego, shadow, and identity. You might recognize these patterns from your own life, or you might suddenly understand a situation that never made sense before. Either way, stay with me until the end, because the final insight could completely change how you view your past. And if this message resonates with you, don't just watch silently, be part of this space. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. The moment a narcissist realizes they have lost control over you is not loud or dramatic on the surface, but internally it can feel like an earthquake. At first, there is confusion, because they are used to believing they can predict your reactions, influence your emotions, and pull you back whenever they choose. Your emotional independence disrupts that familiar pattern. You stop responding the way you used to, you no longer seek their approval, and their words no longer carry the same weight. This subtle shift is often the first sign to them that something has changed, and it creates a deep, unspoken discomfort. A narcissist thrives on emotional control because it feeds their sense of identity. Their self-worth is often built not from inner stability, but from how much power they feel they hold over others. When that power fades, they don't simply feel rejected, they feel exposed. Carl Jung spoke about the ego's fear when its illusion of dominance collapses, and this idea explains the psychological tension that begins to unfold. The narcissist's ego depends on the belief that they are superior, desired, and in control. Your detachment challenges that belief, and when the ego is threatened, it reacts with anxiety, defensiveness, and inner chaos. What makes this moment so complex is that they rarely show this panic openly. Instead, they may appear calm, dismissive, or even indifferent, but beneath that surface confidence, there is often a storm of fear and insecurity. They begin to question why their usual tactics are no longer working, why the emotional strings they once pulled so easily now feel cut. Your silence becomes louder than any argument, because it tells them they no longer have access to your inner world. This is deeply unsettling for someone who is used to being the emotional center of attention. They may replay past conversations in their mind, searching for the exact moment they lost influence, trying to understand where their control slipped away. Yet instead of admitting vulnerability, they often turn that discomfort inward or disguise it with pride. Jung described this as the ego's struggle to maintain its mask when the truth threatens to break through. The narcissist's identity is often a carefully constructed persona designed to protect them from feelings of inadequacy. When you walk away emotionally, you unintentionally hold up a mirror to that false self, and what they see in that reflection is not power but fragility. That realization can feel unbearable. They might begin to experience a silent panic, not because they miss you in a healthy emotional way, but because they fear the loss of validation, admiration, and control that once sustained them. Your independence sends a powerful message. They are no longer needed to define your worth. This is the moment when the dynamic truly shifts. You are no longer reacting, proving, explaining, or trying to be understood. You are simply existing outside their influence, and that is something they struggle to comprehend. To them, it feels like losing a role they believed was permanent. They may not admit it, but your emotional freedom threatens the very foundation of how they see themselves. This internal conflict often stays hidden, buried beneath pride, silence, or subtle behavioral changes, but it is there, growing quietly. The loss of control forces them to confront a truth they try to avoid. They are not as powerful as they believed, and they cannot force someone to stay connected who has truly chosen to let go. That realization, even if unspoken, marks the beginning of a profound psychological shift, one that can linger long after the relationship has ended. When you walk away for good, something happens beneath the surface of the narcissist's mind that they rarely ever admit. even to themselves. On the outside, they may appear unaffected, cold, or even superior, as though your absence means nothing, but internally the impact can be far deeper than they want anyone to see. The ego, which is the fragile center of their identity, takes a serious wound. For many narcissistic personalities, the ego is not just confidence, it is a carefully constructed shield designed to hide insecurity, shame, and unresolved pain. Your permanent departure doesn't simply feel like rejection, it feels like a direct threat to the image they have spent years building. They begin to feel something they work very hard to avoid exposure. The loss of your attention, validation, and emotional energy forces them to face a terrifying question they usually suppress, which is whether they were ever truly as powerful, desirable, or in control as they believed. Instead of openly acknowledging that pain, they often bury it. Vulnerability feels dangerous to them, so they push it into the background of their mind, pretending it doesn't exist. This is where Carl Jung's idea of the shadow self becomes especially relevant. Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we refuse to accept do not disappear, they sink into the unconscious and emerge in subtle, often destructive ways. For the narcissist, the shadow is filled with self-doubt, shame, envy, and fear of worthlessness. When you leave and do not return, that shadow begins to grow louder. Behind closed doors, in moments of solitude they rarely discuss, they may replay memories, feel waves of resentment, or experience a strange mix of anger and longing they don't know how to process. Their usual coping strategies, such as distraction, superiority, or emotional detachment, may no longer work as effectively because the wound touches something deeper than pride. It touches identity. They are forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that they could not keep you, control you, or bend you to their expectations. That realization quietly cracks the foundation of the false self they rely on. The false self is the version of them that seeks admiration, control, and dominance, the persona that says, "I am untouchable." But your departure tells a different story. It suggests that they are not invincible, that their influence has limits, and that someone could see through the illusion and choose freedom instead. This creates internal conflict. They may begin to feel more irritable, more defensive, or more withdrawn, even if they never connect those feelings directly to you. In private, the mind becomes a battlefield between the image they want to maintain and the truth they are struggling to avoid. Shame may creep in, not always consciously, but as a quiet discomfort that follows them. Self-doubt may appear in small ways, like questioning their attractiveness, their charm, or their ability to keep people attached. Yet instead of using this moment for genuine self-reflection, many narcissists double down on denial. They tell themselves you were the problem, that you were ungrateful, that you didn't understand their worth. These narratives are not always created out of malice, but out of psychological survival. Accepting the truth would mean admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like collapse. Still, the fracture remains. It shows up in the silence when they are alone, in the memories they cannot fully erase, and in the lingering awareness that someone once saw through them and walked away anyway. This is the paradox of the narcissistic ego. It looks strong from the outside, but is deeply fragile within. Your absence becomes a reminder they cannot easily escape, a quiet echo that challenges the story they tell themselves. Even if they never speak your name again, the internal shift has already occurred. The ego, once inflated by control and validation, now carries a crack, and that crack changes the way they see themselves, the way they relate to others, and the way they move through the world. When a narcissist realizes the connection is truly over, one of the most powerful coping strategies they turn to is not reflection, but storytelling. Not a story grounded in truth, but a carefully edited version of events where they are no longer responsible for what went wrong. Instead of sitting with discomfort and asking themselves hard questions, they begin to rewrite the narrative in their own mind. In this rewritten version, they are the misunderstood one, the one who tried, the one who was hurt, and you slowly become the villain of the story. This is not always done out of conscious manipulation. Often it happens automatically because facing the real truth would be too threatening to their fragile sense of self. Accepting responsibility would mean admitting they made mistakes, that they caused pain, or that their behavior contributed to the breakdown. And for someone with narcissistic tendencies, that level of self-awareness can feel unbearable. So instead, they rehearse a different story again and again, both internally and externally, until it begins to feel real to them. They replay arguments in their head but change the details. They remember your reactions but conveniently forget what provoked them. They recall moments where you set boundaries and reinterpret them as betrayal. Over time, the narrative becomes more polished, more convincing, and more emotionally comfortable for them to hold on to. This process protects their self-concept, the image they desperately want to maintain of being good, superior, and justified. Carl Jung described this psychological defense as projection, which is when a person disowns the parts of themselves they cannot accept and instead assigns those traits to someone else. The anger they never acknowledge becomes your temper. The emotional distance they created becomes your coldness. The manipulation they used becomes your dishonesty. By placing their own inner flaws onto you, they avoid the painful task of self-examination. This projection allows them to preserve their ego while still making sense of the loss. It gives them a story that feels safe. It allows them to tell friends, family, and even themselves that they were the one who was wronged, that they were the victim of someone who didn't appreciate them, understand them, or treat them fairly. In conversations, they may subtly reshape events, leaving out key details that would cast them in a negative light. They might say things like, "I gave everything and got nothing in return," or "they changed for no reason," or "I was the only one trying." These statements are not always deliberate lies. Often, they are the result of deep self-deception. The mind reshapes memory to reduce inner conflict, and over time, the altered version can feel more real than the truth. What makes this especially painful for those who have walked away is knowing that their story is being distorted. You may recognize that your boundaries are being labeled as cruelty, your emotional exhaustion as selfishness, your need for peace as abandonment. This distortion can feel unfair, but it serves a powerful psychological function. For the narcissist, it keeps their inner world intact. It prevents the collapse of the identity they depend on. If they were to fully accept their role in the breakdown, they would have to face shame, guilt, and vulnerability, emotions they have spent much of their life avoiding. So instead, the story becomes their shield. They repeat it in their mind, in conversations, sometimes even in subtle posts or comments, reinforcing the idea that they were the one who suffered. This repeated rehearsal strengthens the narrative until it becomes part of how they see themselves. Yet beneath that story, there is often tension. The truth does not disappear just because it is ignored. Somewhere in the background, there may be moments of doubt, fleeting realizations that the story doesn't fully add up. But rather than exploring those moments, they are quickly covered with justification, blame, and denial. This is the tragedy of projection. It protects the ego but prevents growth. It keeps the person stuck in a loop where they cannot learn, cannot heal, and cannot genuinely connect. And while they may succeed in convincing others, or even themselves, that they were the victim, the deeper psychological conflict remains unresolved. Your absence, your boundaries, and your decision to walk away become woven into their story in a way that preserves their pride, but it also quietly exposes how fragile that pride truly is. When a narcissist realizes that you are gone for good, one of the behaviors that often emerges, though rarely acknowledged, is silent observation. Even if they do not reach out, comment, or attempt to reinsert themselves into your life, many narcissists develop an almost compulsive need to monitor you from a distance. This is not rooted in love, genuine care, or a desire for reconnection, but in an unresolved attachment to the validation, attention, and emotional energy they once received from you. Every like, post, story, or mutual connection can become a small thread of information that allows them to measure your life without your presence. In their mind, this silent monitoring is a way to maintain some sense of control over a situation they can no longer directly influence. It is as though your absence becomes a mirror reflecting the power they once held and are now struggling to reclaim. The narcissist is acutely aware that you no longer respond to their manipulations or seek their approval, and that realization can be deeply unsettling. Yet rather than confronting the loss, they create subtle ways to keep tabs on you, almost as if watching from afar can somehow fill the void left by your independence. Carl Jung's ideas about the shadow self provide insight into this behavior, as it is often rooted in unacknowledged emotions and unmet needs. The narcissist's ego struggles to come to terms with the reality that their influence is gone, and monitoring you allows them to project a sense of continued relevance while avoiding direct confrontation with their own fragility. They replay memories, check social media updates, and sometimes even rely on mutual friends for updates about your life. Each glimpse, however small, becomes a tool to measure their own worth against yours, to assess what they have lost, and, in some ways, to reassure themselves that your world has not entirely eclipsed theirs. What makes this behavior so insidious is that it often exists entirely in the private realm. Outwardly, they may appear calm, indifferent, or even proud, but internally this silent vigilance can consume a significant amount of their emotional energy. Your life, your choices, and your independence are constantly reflected back to them, highlighting their inability to control or influence your reality. It is a paradoxical behavior. They crave information and attention, yet they cannot have the very connection they want, and the tension this creates can intensify feelings of frustration, inadequacy, and self-doubt. The act of monitoring from a distance can also serve as a subconscious attempt to process the loss without fully acknowledging it. By observing rather than interacting, they maintain the illusion of closeness while avoiding the vulnerability that genuine emotional engagement would require. They can witness your successes, milestones, and even moments of happiness, and while this may trigger envy, insecurity, or resentment, it also reinforces the reality that you are living independently, thriving without their influence, and moving forward on your own terms. This silent observation can become a repetitive, almost ritualistic pattern, because it temporarily satisfies a craving for relevance and validation that has been disrupted. Your absence becomes a mirror reflecting not just the life you are building, but the emptiness of the power they once wielded. Even though they cannot reclaim you, the act of watching allows them to feel a semblance of control, however fleeting, over the narrative of your life. In many ways, this behavior is a window into the deep internal struggle a narcissist experiences when confronted with loss. It highlights their inability to process abandonment in a healthy way and reveals how intertwined their sense of self is with external validation. While the outside world may never see this hidden vigilance, it speaks volumes about the silent impact your independence has on someone who once believed they could command your attention indefinitely. Your choice to step away, to refuse to engage, and to prioritize your own well-being forces the narcissist to confront a truth they would rather avoid. The control they once had is gone, and no amount of monitoring from afar can restore it. When a narcissist experiences the finality of your departure, one of the most profound and often hidden shifts that occurs is the slow collapse of their false self. The persona they present to the world, the confident, charming, in-control version of themselves, is not who they truly are at their core. It is a carefully constructed mask designed to protect them from vulnerability, criticism, and feelings of inadequacy. This mask is maintained through attention, admiration, and the subtle control they exert over others, but when someone like you detaches permanently, the very foundation of that mask begins to crumble. You no longer participate in the game they have been playing, and without your emotional energy reinforcing their constructed identity, cracks start to appear. Carl Jung described the process of healing as beginning when illusions fall apart, and in the narcissist's case, your absence forces this process prematurely and unwillingly. The mask that once allowed them to navigate the world with a sense of superiority and control now feels hollow, and they are confronted with parts of themselves they have long avoided: insecurity, fear, shame, and the recognition of their own limitations. This confrontation is deeply uncomfortable because it exposes vulnerabilities they have spent years hiding, not only from others but from themselves. The collapse is rarely dramatic or visible. It often happens quietly and internally, manifesting as self-doubt, confusion, and a heightened sensitivity to perceived slights. Every memory of your departure, every reflection on your independence, chips away at the illusion they rely on to feel whole. The narcissist may attempt to patch the cracks with blame, projection, or rehearsed narratives where they cast themselves as the victim, but these efforts are only temporary. Beneath the surface, the recognition grows that the persona they have maintained is unsustainable without external reinforcement. Your choice to never come back becomes a mirror that reflects not only what they have lost, but also who they are when stripped of the roles, manipulations, and performances they once depended on. This is a deeply isolating experience. The false self thrived in a social context where others were the audience, validating their worth and masking their insecurities. But when you are gone, there is no one left to perform for. For the first time, they may confront the uncomfortable reality that their identity is not as solid as they imagined. This internal collapse does not necessarily lead to immediate change or growth. Many narcissists respond with denial, anger, or redoubled attempts to control other aspects of their environment, but the cracks are present nonetheless. They feel the strain of maintaining the facade without the usual sources of validation, and this internal tension can simmer for months or even years. Ironically, your absence, while painful for them in their own way, represents a kind of catalyst for self-reflection, even if they resist it. Jung believed that growth begins when the ego and illusions are challenged, and the narcissist is now forced into this confrontation involuntarily. They may never fully process it, or they may continue to avoid facing the truth, but the process has begun simply because they can no longer rely on your presence to prop up their false identity. Your decision to detach and never return highlights a fundamental truth they have long avoided: that self-worth cannot be sustained through control, manipulation, or external validation alone. The mask, which once seemed unbreakable, now shows the fractures, and every interaction, memory, or thought of you serves as a reminder of what is missing. It is a silent, private reckoning, one that may never be visible to the outside world but is profound nonetheless. The narcissist's false self, so long maintained by others' responses and their own internal performances, is forced to confront its fragility, and while they may respond with defensiveness, projection, or indifference, the cracks are there. They exist because someone chose autonomy over manipulation, integrity over control, and freedom over their illusions. Your departure does not only remove their influence over you, it forces them, whether they like it or not, to face themselves. In this sense, the collapse of the false self is both a confrontation with vulnerability and a mirror of the power they once thought they possessed. It is ironic and almost poetic that the very act of walking away, simple, quiet, and resolute, can have such a profound impact, quietly dismantling the carefully constructed persona and leaving the narcissist to reckon with a version of themselves they may have spent a lifetime avoiding. When someone finally leaves a narcissist and never returns, their absence does more than just end a relationship. It leaves an unspoken mark that lingers far longer than they would ever admit. Narcissists are accustomed to having influence, control, and a predictable emotional response from those around them. When you step away with quiet strength, setting firm boundaries and refusing to be drawn back in, you disrupt the entire system they relied on to feel powerful. This absence is not just noticed, it resonates deeply within their psyche, even if they do not consciously recognize it. For the first time, they are confronted with the reality that someone existed who could not be manipulated, swayed, or coerced into staying. Someone whose independence and self-respect were stronger than their tactics of control. That realization leaves a subtle but lasting psychological imprint. They may attempt to rationalize your departure by blaming circumstances, attributing flaws to you, or rewriting the story in their mind, but no matter how much they try to distort the truth, the fact remains: you were the one person who refused to be conquered. In many cases, your absence becomes a quiet, unspoken lesson. It teaches them, whether they acknowledge it or not, that influence is never absolute and that control is an illusion when faced with true autonomy. Jung's ideas about the shadow and self-awareness provide insight into this dynamic, as your departure exposes their limitations and forces them, at least indirectly, to confront aspects of themselves they would rather ignore. Your strength becomes a mirror reflecting not only what they could not achieve, but also the vulnerabilities they have spent a lifetime hiding. Over time, this lingering presence can serve multiple roles in their internal life. For some, it becomes a catalyst for growth. In rare cases, a narcissist may eventually confront their flaws, recognize patterns of manipulation, or develop a deeper understanding of themselves and others. Your absence challenges them in ways that no confrontation, argument, or emotional outburst could, because it is permanent and undeniable. However, for many narcissists, the lesson remains unspoken and unresolved. Your independence serves as a persistent reminder of a truth they cannot fully accept: that control is never guaranteed, that not everyone is susceptible to manipulation, and that not every connection can be reclaimed. The memory of you, intact and free from their influence, may linger quietly in their thoughts, surfacing in fleeting moments of reflection or in comparisons to others, highlighting the unique strength you exhibited. This is what makes the impact so profound. They may continue to live their lives, maintain appearances, and pursue other sources of validation, but the fact that you were the one person who could not be dominated remains. It is a psychological footprint that is difficult, if not impossible, to erase, because it is tied not to your actions in drama or conflict, but to your refusal to participate in the patterns they relied on to feel secure. Your absence is not passive, it actively shapes their inner world, whether they are conscious of it or not. It forces them to reckon, however subtly, with the reality that their power has limits, that not all relationships bend to their will, and that some people's strength cannot be diminished or controlled. In this way, you exist in their mind long after you are gone, not as a presence to manipulate, but as a standard they cannot replicate or surpass. The unspoken lesson of your absence is both a challenge and a mirror, showing them the contrast between control and freedom, between dependence and self-respect, and between illusion and reality. It is ironic that, while they may never vocalize this recognition, your quiet strength achieves something their manipulation never could. It leaves an enduring mark, one that reshapes their understanding of themselves and the world around them. In essence, by stepping away and refusing to return, you teach them, without a word, that there are limits to influence, that independence cannot be forced, and that some people are untouchable not through confrontation, but through their unwavering integrity and resilience. You become, in their mind and psyche, the one person they could not conquer, the one they could not manipulate, and the one who, simply by existing outside of their reach, leaves a lasting lesson they will carry quietly and unacknowledged for the rest of their life.